the water cycle stability over the Atlas Basin controlled the transitions between the Green and the Desert Sahara. The sun disk symbols are all related to Akhet. The Akhet is the one and foremost sacred place of ancient Egyptian religion. After rebirth, the newborn Akh and the sun god Atum will enter the Jackal Lake, which represents the starry sky. The lakes and the canals each have multiple names to define their specific properties. The western lake was called the Jackal Lake due to its shape like a jackal head if one stands on the high-rising Atlas mountain and looks at it from the north. In the Egyptian pantheon, the jackal god Anubis is one of the most popular gods, but no relevant myth involved him. He must be the personification of the Jackal Lake for its purification, protection, and guidance in the afterlife of the deceased. The Jackal Lake was called the Great Green, which was most likely the origin of Osiris' symbol color. Osiris is the god of afterlife and the resurrection. He is also honored as the foremost of the Westerners. The Egyptian term green covers a spectrum from green to blue, contrasting to the much of turquoise. On the east, this green to blue color spectrum reflects a water depth change from its shallow shelf to its deeper central area with the depths of about 70 meters. When the water from this deeper Jackal Lake flowed into the shallow Stock Lake, people would feel the sharp coolness of the current. Therefore, the Jackal Lake got the name Cool Waters. It was called the Nurse Lake because it provided the nurturing water to the marsh of reeds, which was later converted to farmland. It was called the Lake of Life or Marsh of Life because it was the place to become clean and get rebirth. It was called the Spread Lake because it spread out from east to west. It was called the Great Lake because it was much bigger than the Stock Lake. It was called the Duat Lake since it was the place to become clean and rise with God. It was called the Sky since it was the place the sun god Atum would go every evening to rest. Generally, it was called the God's Lake or Shu's Lake. Shu is Atlas in Greek mythology. The eastern mega lake was called the Stork Lake since its shape looks like a stork. It was likely the original inspiration for the bird deity Banu, associated with song, recreation, and rebirth. It appears in all the illustrations of the Marsh of Reeds in the Book of the Dead. Likewise, this lake was called the Goose Lake. It was called the Marsh of the Beetles as associated with the sunrise. Water in the Stork Lake was very shallow and gave a turquoise color, so it was called the Marsh of Turquoise. The lake bed is extremely flat, as confirmed by recent satellite measurement. When the water was drained lower at the later stage, reeds flourished and spread widely across the lake. Therefore, it got its prominent name, the Marsh of Reeds. It is a place where the deceased got supplies and rejuvenation before rising with the god. So it was called the Marsh of Rest, the Marsh of Offering, and the Marsh of Ascenders. The Atlantis Basin is in East Algeria and South Tunisia. The Atlantis inundation occurred around 11,000 years ago according to Plato. This recitation in the pyramid text seems to reflect the memory of this event. Gab represents earth, and Gab quakes implies an earthquake due to the surge of the fierce lake. The Shu's wall, or Atlas city, namely Atlantis, was destroyed. The immersion was catastrophic for the island city but had almost no effect on the countryside. People moved to new heights. This data clearly show an abrupt desertification process around 5,700 years ago. This desertification process forced an unprecedented exodus from the Atlas Basin about 5,600 years ago. On the southeast side, the Atlanteans must have followed the retreat of the Green Sahara. A big group of Atlanteans must have relocated to Lower Egypt and built Heliopolis, the great sun city, as a rebirth in the east. The fond memories of their sweet homeland was faithfully preserved in religious traditions. On the north side, Atlanteans likely found a foothold on some Mediterranean islands and the Atlantic facade of Europe.
I remind you of what Plato stated. The names of these first inhabitants have been preserved, but their deeds have perished on account of the catastrophes that befell those who succeeded them. and the long passage of time intervening. Those of their race who survived these successive destructions were, as I said before, left as an illiterate mountain people who had only heard the tradition of the names of the rulers of their country, and beyond these only little of their deeds. Now, they were pleased to give their descendants the names of these rulers, even though they were unaware of their ancestors' virtues and institutions, except for some dim legends concerning each of them. Then, for many generations, these survivors and their children lived in distress for their survival and gave thought to their needs. They spoke only of supplying these needs and had no interest in the events of the distant past. This tale about Atlantis, though strange, is certainly true, having been attested to by Solon, who was the wisest of the 7 sages. As more evidence of humanity's past comes to light, we will be able to remember our collective history and look at the tale of Atlantis not as a myth, but as a window into our past and our potential for the future.